Last week, my family and I went out to dinner. We were seated at a booth, and the family behind us had small children. One of the children was screaming and throwing toys onto our table. Both of the parents just sat there and let this child be rude, not only to my family, but to everybody in the restaurant. One day last week, I was out shopping. There was a mother with some children coming through the door, and the mother held the door for her children, but as I neared the door, she let it swing closed. On the last day of school, I attended my 9-year-old daughter's 3rd grade graduation assembly. As I was preparing to exit the cafeteria, a bunch of tween-age kids came rushing by, knocking all of my awards out of my hand. My purse got knocked to the ground, and all of these kids just kept right on about their way. None of the people in these examples thought to use any form of manners or etiquette. I am by no means ready to don an ankle-length skirt and saddle shoes and step back into the 50s, but it has recently become very obvious that society as a whole is totally lacking in any form of etiquette. It was not very obvious when I was raising my son, who is now 17, but as I watch my 9-year-old daughter play with her friends, I feel like a light's been turned on. I watch her at the playground and I see these other children and I think, how rude. Or I turn the TV on to monitor what she's watching and I think, God, my grandmother is rolling over in her grave. I know that most families these days have 2 working parents or single parents trying to raise the kids on their own. So I realize that the hands-on task of molding the children that women had more a part of a century ago is not very realistic. It is because of this that in today's society, manners and etiquette seem to be falling to the wayside. This is the main reason I believe that etiquette should still be taught in school. While most of today's younger generation relates the word etiquette to something that is old-fashioned, it is more simply a code of polite behavior. Etiquette is a seed that grows manners. It deals with kindness and consideration, elegance, style, and decorum. Manners have nothing to do with how other people act or behave. It is solely about how you act or react to a given situation. And there are far too many who don't know how to handle themselves in any situation. Unfortunately, Americans rate their own manners as quite excellent. And therein lies the problem, says most etiquette instructors. If you doubt this, take an afternoon and go sit at the mall. Just watch people. Don't interact, don't shop, just sit and watch. The lack of etiquette and manners is a growing problem because we, as adults, are breeding this lack of manners into our children. Our children grow and learn by watching how we act and how we behave. They mimic our actions, and eventually our actions will become second nature to them. Our lack of manners will become second nature to them. A survey conducted by Lennox found that more than 1/3 of the 1,000 people polled rated the manners of Americans as poor. That is a 50% increase from the same poll conducted in 2002. Manners are part of building relationships, whether personal or professional. If this number continues to rise and manners continue to get tossed to the wayside, all forms of relationships will suffer. And what will happen to us when we are old and frail and need to be looked after? It has already begun to affect the generation now in high school trying to find work. Teens don't know how to address potential employers. They have not been taught the power of a good, firm handshake. They use slang words unknown to most adults in these interviews. I was in charge of hiring at the last company that I worked for. After collecting a stack of applications, I set a day aside for interviews. I called 8 potential employees and made 8 appointments. Of those 8, only 5 actually showed up. The other 3 never even bothered to call. Of those 5, not one of them was dressed appropriately for the position that was being offered. Only 3 of them had actually brought all of the paperwork that I had requested be brought to the interview. One of the girls actually sat with her phone in her lap for the majority of the interview, looking at her phone and texting or playing on Facebook or whatever it was she was doing. How are you supposed to form a bond with a potential employer if you're not even making eye contact? How are you going to treat the customers and the clients that I am going to leave in your care if you can't even look at me? In truth, you can't. There are times for formality, and there are times when it is appropriate to be more relaxed. You don't always have to be dressed in a suit and tie. Jeans and a t-shirt are appropriate for some settings. The problem is the jeans being full of holes or drooping down past your bottom when you're meeting a new professor or when you are going to speak to a bank officer. When I look at my schedule for the day, I make a mental note of how often I will be outside of my comfort zone. If I'm leaving my yard, I know I can dress a little bit more appropriate